You are listening to Model Mentality. Welcome to Let's Get Clinical by Dr. Allie. In this segment, I explore connecting the dots between our guests' personal stories and the larger mental health context. Please note that the contents of Model Mentality are for informational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your mental health professional or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding your condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on Model Mentality. You've just been listening to our interview with Teddy Quinlivan. Let's review Teddy's story. Teddy Quinlivan is an international fashion model who began modeling at the age of 17 and came out as transgender publicly in 2017. Teddy knew from a young age that she was a girl, despite being assigned male sex at birth due to conventions of anatomy and genetics. Throughout her school years, she was subjected to an extensive history of bullying because of the way she looked. She stayed strong because inside she was clear about who she was, despite the discrimination of those around her. A turning point was in high school when one of her teachers asked her what pronoun she would like to be addressed by. This was the first time that an adult outside of her immediate family had the sensitivity to ask, not assume, and allow Teddy the space to decide on her own how she should be addressed. This is the power of gender affirmation. Teddy came out to her mother at age 16 as transgender, and as you heard in the interview, her mother was not surprised and knew that time was of the essence. After visits with her doctor and a psychologist to support her during the transition, Teddy was put on hormone replacement therapy, female hormones called estradiol and medroxyprogesterone, and started to live the life that she had always dreamt of. Teddy was fortunate in that she had not developed secondary sex characteristics until age 17, and she liked the way that she looked. She was able to conceal the transgender aspect of her identity after her transition and was able to succeed in her modeling career, something that she refers to in the podcast as living in stealth. It was not until more recently, where due to intersection of politics and the personal, Teddy revealed her secret and came out to the world as transgender. We are honored to have Teddy on our podcast and for Teddy to have shared her story with us. What stands out to me from a clinical perspective are three things. 1, understanding gender identity and what transgender is. 2, transgender discrimination. And 3, mental health outcomes. First, what is gender identity and what does transgender refer to? A good definition that I recently found from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry is that gender identity is, quote, one's internal sense of who one is, which results from a multifaceted interaction of biological traits, developmental influences, and environmental conditions. It may be male, female, somewhere in between, a combination of both, or neither. So let's back up and go over a few basic concepts. Concept number 1, binary versus non-binary. So, in the binary world of gender, there is he and she as pronouns, 2 forms of gender, male and female. Non-binary refers to gender identity that does not fall into 2 categories, and the pronouns that are used are they or their instead of he or she. Concept number 2, sexual orientation versus gender identity. Sexual orientation is not the same as gender identity. As Teddy said in the interview, quote, sexuality is who you go to bed with, and gender is who you go to bed as. And for me, that sums it up well. Sexuality or sexual orientation is who you are consistently attracted to, sexually, romantically, and emotionally. Gender identity, going back to the original definition, is one's internal sense of who one is. So what exactly is being transgender? You may have heard of both terms, cisgender and transgender. Cis means same, so cisgender is a person whose gender identity, i.e. the way they feel about their gender, is the same as the sex they were assigned at birth. To illustrate this, I am cisgender. Simply put, I was assigned female at birth, and I've always felt female. Therefore, my gender identity, the way I feel about my gender, is the same or cis as the gender I was assigned at birth. Transgender is a person whose gender assignment at birth differs from the gender they identify with. And as we heard in the podcast, Teddy is transgender. She's always known this. She was assigned male at birth, but she has always felt her identity is female. And for the record, transgender is the T in LGBTQ. So what about transgender discrimination and mental health outcomes among transgender people? Historically, it's well known that the transgender population has been marginalized and subject to stigma and discrimination. Teddy has a personal and prolonged experience of bullying for the way she looked when the outside world viewed her as male. Because her transition was around the same time as the start of her modeling career, she might have been spared a bit due to her passing privilege, as she describes, but she still fights the fight on a daily basis for her community. As clinicians in mental health, we see people of all walks of life, and what we know is that when societal or family norms are not gender inclusive or accepting of gender identity outside of the traditional concepts of male and female, this becomes more difficult for those who don't and can't conform. Can you imagine if you were trapped in a male body but always intrinsically knew you were female? Maybe this is hard for some of you to understand. But if this were the case, and everyone around you would not listen to you, acknowledge your view, nor validate your true and authentic feelings about yourself, and then to top it off, you're made fun of all of your life, discriminated against, and you don't end up with the same opportunities as someone else for something that is just due to who you are and who you feel like you are. Now imagine you start to tell others, despite the odds around you, that you are transgender, because the distress of not being able to express who you are starts to eat away inside of you. But as you tell people, they don't accept it. And in fact, they start to shun you and move away from you and perhaps threaten you and don't allow you to work or integrate into the society around you. And you feel alone and isolated and not accepted because of just being you. Unfortunately, this story is all too common. According to the 2015 U.S. Trans Survey, which is a report put out by the National Center for Transgender Equality, transgender people, compared to the general population, are twice as likely to live in poverty and 3 times as likely to experience unemployment. So what are the known mental health outcomes of all of this? Unfortunately, studies show that transgender people of all ages, including youth and adolescents, have high rates of depression, anxiety, eating disorders, self-harm, and suicide. In fact, one specific study, which looked at suicidality among youth who had identified as transgender, describes that 56% has at one time experienced suicidal ideation, and 31% had made a suicide attempt, a rate that is much higher than in the general population. With respect to my profession, in our classification system, which is found in a manual called the DSM, only quite recently in 2013 did the concept of gender identity disorder cease to exist, and now in the current classification of disorders has changed to a description of distress called gender dysphoria. This refers to the discordance between the sex assigned at birth and gender identity. There's one thing I want to be very clear about. Being transgender is not a mental illness. The increased risk for mental health issues has to do with the complexity of the internal conflict between the assigned sex and gender, stigma, social exclusion, and in general, a historically poor safety net for this community. Although Teddy has clearly experienced an inner psychological struggle through her journey, she stands strong in who she is, as evidenced by her being affirmed by her teacher, her mother, and then transitioning and living out her dream to become a woman. Although Teddy has not had what is formally known as sex reassignment surgery, she has undergone one gender-affirming surgery, breast augmentation, which did indeed have a powerful, unanticipated effect on affirming her identity as a woman. We are honored to hear Teddy's story and to tell it to you in this way. The hope is that you have learned that gender identity, outside of the binary male and female construct, is a part of our human experience. When social and family norms do not support the diversity of gender that exists, people struggle psychologically, and we want you to understand that we are with you, that you are not alone, and that there is power in speaking up and in asking for and receiving help. Thanks for listening to Let's Get Clinical by Dr. Allie. Please check our show notes for references and more information on this episode. As always, if you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. If you're having suicidal thoughts, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255 to talk to a skilled, trained counselor at a crisis center in your area at any time. If you are located outside of the United States, call your local emergency line immediately. What you have heard on model mentality does not represent what would take place during a psychiatric assessment or an actual therapy session.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Model Mentality. If you like today's content, please subscribe to Model Mentality or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, don't forget to rate and review us. Model Mentality is brought to you by Mind Studios.